Hello and happy May Day. Today I'm going to be discussing the books I'll be reading this month, as well as some of my plans for my channel content and my writing plans as well. Now, first and foremost, I'm taking part in a read-along, which I got a little bit of a head start on yesterday over Shabbos. It's for Dr. Zhivago by Boris, Leonidovich, Pasternak. If you haven't seen my recent video of me reciting his heartbreaking poem, Nobel Prize, I encourage you guys to check it out. And now this read-along is hosted by Christy Lewis at Dostoevsky in Space, Stephanie at Ms. Richards Reads, Tiffany at Beautiful Minutiae, and She Was Only Evie. And I'll leave links to their channels down below in the description box. And they're doing some like sprint, I guess, on the Discord throughout the month of May if you're interested in joining. And I guess I'll also do a link to their Discord also in the description box. And they're doing a final wrap up of the entire book on May 28th at 10 a.m. Pacific time, 1 p.m. Eastern time. But unfortunately, because I never use my computer on Shabbos, I won't be able to take part in that. And that's on a Saturday, unfortunately. But I am looking forward to rereading this book because we had to read it for my modern Russian literature class I took when I was at UMass. But I didn't finish it during that class. I obviously read enough to write an essay about it and get good grades on the tests and such. But it was just really slow going, not my style at all. And I think this might have been because it was not like a super old translation, but like an older translation. And so a good translation is worth its weight in salt. And sometimes like when you read a book in a different translation, it feels like you're almost reading it all over again for the very first time. And so my original translation I got for class is in storage 100 miles away. I should add, I finished reading that book after we graduated. Maybe it wasn't like super long, maybe like a year or so after graduation. I got around to finishing it up, and I have many thoughts about it. Obviously, I'll probably be doing that in some videos throughout the months. But this is the more modern translation. My parents got me this as a gift for Hanukkah or my birthday in 2010. There's still a gift receipt in the front cover, so I know what year they got it for me. And this translation is widely acclaimed. The translation team, a lot of people like them. Some people have strong feelings against them, but there are a couple issues I noticed. I know this is going to make me seem like a nitpicking pedant, but I don't care. Russian culture, literature, history, etc. That's my basically area of expertise. And transliteration, that's one of the things I look for when I'm looking through a book. And so anyway, they transliterate the letter E as E, and it should usually be Y-E, yay. It just makes the pronunciation more obvious to me, particularly when there are two of them in a row. For example, the protagonist, his Otchestva, his patronymic is Andreevich, but they, render it with two E's in a row, so Andreevich. And for example, when I write it, and most other modern people write it, it would be Andreevich. So it makes the pronunciation obvious. Before I realized this, when I was just really learning the proper way to transliterate, I mentally mispronounced some things. For example, the town where Tsar Nicholas II lived, most of his time is Tsarskoye Selo, but because it was written with older transliteration, some books I read, I really thought it was pronounced Tsarsko Selo, and the Russified, the anglicized spelling of the Russified spelling of Ukraine's capital, I really thought that was pronounced Kiev for the longest time, and it's like Kiev or Kiev. But that just so proper transliteration makes all the difference in how you pronounce it properly. If I didn't know this, I would want to mentally translate his patronymic as Andreevich because that's how it looks, and also writing a letter E at the start of a name when it's really Yay. For example, Elena is a completely different name from Yelena. They're pronounced completely differently. And if you genuinely are not familiar with the rules of Russian pronunciation, the alphabet and transliteration such, why would you know to pronounce a name with that spelling as Yelena when it looks like Elena? And just for example, Yuri's wife, her nickname is Tonyechka, one of her nicknames, but they spell it like it should be pronounced Tonechka, and also that's just something. It kind of bugs me a little bit. I know it's tiny, little getting into the weeds, such like that, but that's just something that I really look for when I'm reading a translation and such. And I'm wondering what else did they get wrong if they can't get a couple of finer details correct. And also the name Larissa only has one S in Russian, but they render it with two S's in the book. That's another thing. And also I was really shocked when I thought this. There are a few instances in the book when they use male forms of surnames for women, but as far as I can see so far, only when it's with the title Mrs. And Russian is a language that has grammatical gender, which means surnames differ by whether you're male or female. So obviously it would be grammatically incorrect to use a male form of a surname on a woman, obviously, unless it's, of course, it's something from a non-Russian culture. Obviously, the same rules wouldn't apply to that. But anyway, that's just, something I noticed when looking through this book. And also the margins could be a little bit wider, but that's like a subject for a whole other thing. I'm planning a future video about, like, how to format your books if you're an author, and also what you might want to look for as just a reader, like, the most comfortable, like, thing to read, like, trim size and margin size and such like that. And also, as I mentioned in my previous video, Boris Leonidovich, he was a poet first and foremost. He wasn't a novelist, and I'm really not saying this to try to be, like, mean or bash him or anything. I absolutely love him, both as a poet and as a human being, but, it's just obvious he was not, like, familiar with writing novels. He was familiar with writing poetry, and so therefore there are a number of things throughout the book that, kind of stick out as amateurish, not necessarily mistakes, just, the kind of thing you do when you're just learning how to write. And if he had continued writing novels or had a, like, more practice, like, earlier in his life, perhaps he wouldn't have made these. Like, for example, the one thing that really, like, sticks out to me many times, like, a character will disappear for a long time, maybe even 200 pages, and all of a sudden that character will just pop up out of nowhere for no real reason. It doesn't really advance the plot or do anything with character development. It's just, oh yeah, I'm reminding you this character exists, and this character wasn't really important at all, but, like, here he is, just, hey, how you doing? And obviously I'm not going to give away spoilers or anything, but I mean, the ending of the novel, it was, like, perfectly, like, wonderful, absolutely beautiful, like the great, perfect place to stop it. And then there's an epilogue, and that epilogue just left a really, really bitter taste in my mouth. But obviously I can't really, like, go into any details about why that is without giving away massive spoilers and such. But other than that, I am looking forward to rereading this book. As I mentioned, I read chapter 1 yesterday, and maybe this translation will make it seem, like, better than it was before, and almost like rereading it again almost for the very first time. And also, I should mention them. Love story kind of fell flat for me when I was reading the older translation. I don't know if that's an error of the translation itself, or maybe it's just, again, like, being, like, a poet trying to write a novel. I never really, felt, like, wrapped up in this so-called love story. Like, why were these people leaving their existing partner for this, like, taboo new relationship? I never really, like, had a reason to believe or go along with that. Just, oh, they cross paths more and more over the years, and then finally they become lovers, and here their relationship is. But I never really, felt, like, emotionally drawn into it, or, like, really believing why they felt so strongly for one another. But I guess I'll discuss that more in future videos about this book. And also, I wasn't really fond of the film when I saw it, from, like, 1965, I believe it is. They left out a lot of things from the novel, and they, like, added in, like, stupid stuff. Like, I'm almost positive there was, like, nothing about Aleichem in the novel at all, but they, like, made this, like, huge, like, silly, sappy plot point. So, a lot of, like, films just don't get things right when they're based off of novels. And so I'm doing my very first buddy read. I've never done one before, although I've been making booktube content since September. I'm going to do it with Tom LA Books and Christina at Knitting Books, etc. for this one. The Betrothed, I Promessi, Sposi by Alessandro Manzoni. It was written in the 19th century, but set in the 17th century. I know there's a new translation coming out this September, but obviously that you can't get that in time for the buddy read. And since I've never done a buddy read before, it'll be a very big learning curve for me. Like, for example, I don't know how, like, often or how, like, long you're supposed to check in, like, leave a message every week or every day or every 2 weeks or whatever, or how long the, like, message or communication should be, or, what kind of wrap-up video you're going to be doing at the end, and what exactly you'll be discussing. I know a lot of people are using Voxer. I did sign up for that, but I'm, kind of remembering when I used Skype, like, 10 years ago or so, a lot of, like, creeps, like, perverts, and many of them weren't even, native English speakers. They would just, like, hit me up trying to get sex chat, and I really, really hope that does not happen on Voxer. I'm not that kind of woman at all. I really hated when these, like, total strangers, like, just, like, messaged me on Skype looking for, like, disgusting, perverted, like, gross stuff. And, I really don't like that at all. And I really hope that does not happen at all on Voxer. So hopefully it'll be, like, a much better experience than my experience on Skype was. And I also hope I can avoid the glitches I've heard a lot of people complaining about with Voxer. And since May is Jewish American Heritage Month. I'm also hoping to read at least one of these books originally written in Yiddish I've had for a while. I got them from the Mr. K's used bookstore. I really love Sholem Aleichem. I guess I would consider him in my lower half of my top 10 of favorite writers. Obviously, he was a very prolific Yiddish writer. His collection, Tevye the Dairyman, also sometimes called Tevye's Daughters or Tevye and His Daughters, was the basis of the play, later film Fiddler on the Roof, and it's like a really wonderful story collection. It's like one of the best, book to film adaptations I'm aware of. It, obviously leaves some things out and changes some things, but there aren't like gaping holes in what is left out, and nothing is too, like wildly divergent from what actually happens. And this is called Marienbad. I'm again not I'll be mentioning this more in a future video all about formatting, but I'm not really wild about how they use like a ragged right margin in this book. That's obviously you want to justify your margins when you're like formatting a book. But anyway, I'll get to that more in my detailed video about formatting. And this is a synopsis. Written in 1911, but only recently translated, Marienbad is Sholem Aleichem's epistolary comic novel about, as Aleichem himself writes, an entanglement between two cities, Warsaw and Marienbad, told through 36 letters, 14 love notes, and 46 telegrams. Long regarded as the master portrayer of the shtetl, Sholem Aleichem turns in Marienbad to a characterization of bourgeois life in the Jewish neighborhoods of cosmopolitan Warsaw in the early 1900s. These people indulge a lust for material goods and worry about arranging their children's marriages or their own flirtations, while keeping an eye out for what everyone else is up to. Through a web of written communications among a closely knit group of friends and relatives, Aleichem lovingly and playfully creates a poignant portrait of a vanished people. And I would highly recommend checking out any of his story collections. And he also wrote stories for children, but adults can enjoy them too in their own way. He was just, absolutely a wonderful reader. I highly encourage you guys to check him out. And this is another, it's actually two books in one, but they're, a sequel, a duology by Isaac Bashevis Singer, The Manor, which is his title for the combined collection. And their two separate novels are called The Manor and The Estate. And this is the synopsis. This is the author's note, and then there's like a general synopsis. The Manor and The Estate were written as one book, originally published in Yiddish between 1953 and 1955 in the Jewish Daily Forward. The original title is Der Hof, which means the court. It is only for technical reasons that this work first appeared in English in two separate volumes and at separate times under the imprint of Farrar, Straus, and Giraud, The Manor in 1967 and The Estate in 1969. And I am happy that they are now coming out in one volume under the title of the first part. Both parts were translated into English by my nephew, Joseph Singer, and by Elaine Gottlieb. A few of the chapters were also translated by Hermann Eichenthal. The entire novel was edited by Cecil Hemley and Elizabeth Shube before it was sent to Robert Giraud, my editor for almost 20 years, who did the final editing. I dedicate this book to the blessed memory of my brother and master, Israel Joshua Singer, and of my sister Hinda. This is the author's note to the original edition, which is a brief synopsis of it. The Manor was written between 1953 and 1955. As with many of my stories and all my novels, with the exception of Satan and Gorai, which I wrote while still in Warsaw, it was first serialized in the Jewish Daily Forward. Although The Manor was published many years after the family Moscat, it portrays an earlier period, the epoch between the Polish insurrection of 1863 and the end of the 19th century. It was the era of gas lamps, the time when the Poles had finally become resigned to their loss of independence and turned to a kind of national positivism. Poland now began to emerge as an industrial country. Railroads were built, factories were opened, and the cities grew rapidly. The Jews, who until 1863 for the most part still lived in a ghetto atmosphere, now began to play an important role in Polish industry, commerce, the arts, and sciences. All the spiritual and intellectual ideas that triumphed in the modern era had their roots in the world of that time: socialism and nationalism, Zionism and assimilationism, nihilism and anarchism, suffragettism, atheism, the weakening of the family bond, free love, and even the beginnings of fascism. The Estate, a sequel to and the conclusion of The Manor, ends in the last years of the 19th century, an epoch when humanism undertook to practice what it had preached for generations. What happened in the village of Yampol, and what was discussed by a small group of self-educated youths in furnished rooms in Warsaw, became the basis of the social upheavals and the terrible disillusions of our present time. And then he again talks about the translations and his dedications for the book. So anyway, I'm looking forward to this, as I've mentioned several times. But I think I might have read or at least listened to a few stories by Isaac Bashevis Singer, but the only novel of his I remember reading was Shadows in the Hudson, which I believe came out posthumously in 1997, or just around the time he died, and I read it around 1998, maybe 1999, and I really enjoyed it very much. And here is another book he read, Enemies, a Love Story. A book he wrote, Enemies, a Love Story, and it sounds like a really interesting synopsis. This poor guy is in so much trouble. Almost before he knows it, Hermann Broder, refugee and survivor of World War II, has 3 wives. Jadwiga, the Polish peasant who hid him from the Nazis, Masha, his beautiful and neurotic true love, and Tamara, his first wife, miraculously returned from the dead. Astonished by each new complication, and yet resigned to a life of evasion, Hermann navigates a crowded Yiddish New York with a sense of perpetually impending doom. The first of Singer's novels to be set in America, Enemies, a Love Story, tells an unexpected and moving tale, and I believe this might have been turned into a film at one point. The title is familiar, and here is the author's note. Although I did not have the privilege of going through the Hitler Holocaust, I have lived for years in New York with refugees from this ordeal. I therefore hasten to say that this novel is by no means the story of the typical refugee, his life and struggle. Like most of my fictional works, this book presents an exceptional case with unique heroes and a unique combination of events. The characters are not only Nazi victims, but victims of their own personalities and fates. If they fit into the general picture, it is because the exception is rooted in the rule. As a matter of fact, in literature, the exception is the rule. And then he goes on about the translation history of the book. So this sounds like a really interesting story. Like, how is this poor guy going to get out of being an unintentional bigamist and having like 3 wives? And here are also, I mentioned in a few previous videos, I'm refreshing my Spanish by reading some children's books, bilingual books. And when I read in Spanish, language comes right back. I basically only have to look over to the English side or the English section of the page. If there's an unfamiliar word I don't remember learning, or if it's been so long I have remembered learning that word. These are just like traditional folk tales from Latin America, and it's just like lovely stories. Aren't really, I got it for them. Picture this on readathon, but there aren't very many pictures at all. That was in the picture book section of the children's room at the library. Había una vez, which means once upon a time, and I'm really looking forward to reading this. It's obviously a little bit more longer and more complex than the picture books in Spanish I've read, so hopefully I will be, getting back up to the level of Spanish I had the last time I was formally studying it. I studied it for 7 years, but unfortunately just haven't had many chances at all to actually use the language. I can read it much better than I speak it, and I'm also hoping to refresh my Russian, which again I can read much better than I speak, and I have never forgotten the Cyrillic alphabet. That's just once it's in the memory bank, it's there. I can read it, even if I go a long time without ever needing to read it or write it. And I got these out from the library too. They're mostly coffee table books, wild babies, beautiful pictures of wild animal babies. Just I love animals. I would have become a vet if I could live with having to put an animal down when it gets very old and sick. That's just not something I can personally have on my conscience, even knowing sometimes it's the best thing for that animal. And I discussed a bit more in a previous video I did about these other 2 books, coffee table books, the Photo Arc and the Photo Arc Vanishing, just beautiful animal photography from National Geographic. I can show you guys some of the pictures, but I did show a lot in the previous video I did. Just I love animals. I would love to have enough space in a home someday to have a whole mini menagerie of pets, or maybe even have a little hobby farm, or live on a kibbutz someday, so I could just be around animals all the time. Maybe I should do a few videos specifically talking about animal books and my love for animals, if anyone is interested in them. I don't really have a favorite, although my spirit animals, which I'm saying in a completely serious way, not a jokey way, are the spider and the turtle. I just absolutely love those animals. They just pop up in my life so often, and I really relate to their symbolism and their just the things they represent. For example, being steadfast, slow and steady wins the race. We decide our own fate. We're constantly changing nature of appearances. And here are just, a few of the pictures in the photo arc Vanishing, which is about like endangered, threatened species, and a few who unfortunately are no longer in this world with us because the most dangerous species in creation, humans, like killed them all off, or like these horrible things we've done to animals. We were all put on the same planet for a reason, and it wasn't to, like dominate over animals and abuse them and just act like we're so much better than they are just because we have the gift of speech and like more higher cognitive functions, and we like don't live as simply out in the wilderness like animals do. Maybe I'll do some future videos about these books in particular. And also for writing, I'm getting back to my the book formerly known as the Very Last. It's the third in my Atlantic City prequel series, so it's set over the course of 1940. I know this might disappoint some people. I'm obviously not like putting this away forever, just like a little while. I'm putting my alternative history about Dante and Beatrice on hiatus for a little bit because I'm just more inspired to get back to this book, The Very Last, right now. It does have a new and improved title for publication. It's based on, inspired by a line from one of Charlie Chaplin's Talking Pictures, but it's not the Great Dictator, not the most obvious one you can think of. And I'm just like much more inspired to want to like finally get back to this radical rewrite and restructuring already, so I can hopefully like have it ready for publication by the end of the year. It's like much shorter than my typical books, although it's probably the finished product of the radical rewrite will probably be maybe like 120-ish thousand words, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. It all depends. And so this is the book I have my notes for like rewriting it like chapter by chapter, and also for the fourth book, which working title is almost as an afterthought, the first 6 months of 1941, which does need a much more like new and improved title. These are the more recent notes I put in it about like, for example, Van Meter Plaza, which is a fictional plaza in the fictional Atlantic City neighborhood. It's based on Stuyvesant Plaza in Albany, New York, with like very similar stores, like for example like a fur store or like a toy store, a bookstore, like little indie clothing boutiques and such. They're not obviously like word for word based on them, but they're just the fact that those kinds of stores exist in the plaza, and they exist in this Van Meter Plaza as well. So I wrote down like a lot of the historical tenets of the plaza with fictional names, and obviously the real like Stuyvesant Plaza doesn't have nearly as many stores as this, but I guess it could be in a bigger plaza, and also does have like a smaller like plaza also in the overflow lot, in a big building with executive suites and people renting it in the office. And just these are all the notes I wrote like over a year ago now for this book, and I'm really, well, obviously I did get back to it during the end of April Camp Nano Rimo, and I'm hopefully, now that the month is over, I'm going to be like doing it much more like carefully and much more prolifically. Thank you very much for listening. My next video should hopefully be a few days from now, later this week. If you haven't, please consider subscribing to me. I really love seeing comments from people, and also I'm liking and sharing. And thank you very much again for watching. See you soon. Bye.